getting a customer's perspective and not just, the engineers or the people in the back room, what they think. Why? Because you're not buying your own products. You're not going to buy, in this particular case, $1 million wafer stepper, right? It is not. I need to know about the people who are going to buy it. What are their concerns? What are their issues? What are your concerns about your brand?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to an episode of the Process Lab. I'm your host, Sam Droshak, and today we're joined by Angelo Ponzi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad to be here.
As you all know, the Process Lab podcast is the show where we tackle common business problems and provide insights for operational excellence. And today we're very excited to have Angelo with us. Angelo is a fractional CMO and the founder of Craft, a company specializing in consulting, interim and fractional marketing, strategic leadership, and coaching services. Craft prioritizes strategic and analytical approaches to marketing, aiming to foster sustainable business growth. The team helps companies gain deeper insights into their competitive market by conducting thorough research on customers, prospects, competitors, and the broader marketplace. With a focus on empowering businesses, Craft ensures companies have the tools and knowledge they need to thrive in their market. So that is Angelo in a nutshell. And I know from speaking to him briefly before the show, he's in marketing, but he actually considers his expertise more in strategy, data, and more on that side of the house, which is great to my ears as a process person. So I'm actually going to kick it over to you, Angelo, to supplement any of my intro and also kind of tell us what you mean by you live more in the strategic and the data space.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Like the intro with the good description of what I do. And so for me, I believe in any marketing situation and when you're developing your tactics, unless you really understand the market that you're competing in, you understand your competition and really about what the motivations, behaviors, and drivers of your customers, the tactical stuff might not be as strong, might be irrelevant, frankly. So you're putting out messaging that doesn't resonate with your audience. And so for me, understanding all of that stuff, again, using qualitative, quantitative research, other various techniques to get those insights can help craft your story, your messaging, your positioning, and ultimately helps define, your revenue growth plan. And so those are kind of the areas that I work in. Now, do I do the tactical stuff? Yes, I do some of it. I have a lot of partners as well, but ultimately I never start there. I always have to start on this side of the fence, if you will. Otherwise it just becomes, throwing stuff up against a wall and hoping that it sticks.
Got it. Well, and also before we even jump in deeper there, I always like to contextualize, and that's sort of my process brain. What kind of clients do you normally work with? What kind of processes might they be struggling with that makes it a good fit to engage in the kind of activities you were just describing?
Sure. So I'm more B2B right now, but I have a B2C and a B2B background. But typically when I get called in, it's, the complaining about revenues are down, new competitors, they feel maybe they need a brand refresh. But because I come at things holistically, I dig into operations, I dig into, manufacturing and inventory and everything I can get my hands on, because ultimately it is the big picture. Marketing is just a piece of it. And so I always look at what's the flow. How do things move? Where are there's issues? In some of the cases that I've had, I've spent a lot of my time fixing internal teams because the internal process is broken. There's fighting going on. They don't get along. There's no leadership. And so I do spend a lot of time trying to fix those processes, if you will, to make sure we have a workflow that makes sense and leads to success. Last year I worked on a client, and I noticed that their pipeline, that the youngest client or prospect they had in their pipeline was 150 days. And the rest were, in some cases, over a year. And so first I was like, okay, fine. What do I know? Right. But once I got into the client, it was like, why does it take so long? I mean, we're at 90 days, maybe 4 months, and it should be a client. And it turned out to be, long story short, that they waited to the very end to hand the paperwork over to the lawyers. And then the lawyers got involved and the process just dragged out. And I said, I'm not brilliant, but couldn't you just take this and hand it to the lawyers since 90% of it's all standard? And they go, yeah, I guess we could do that. And this was a 41-year-old company that had been operating that way. And so just looking for different areas, inventory, I working with a client, and we were in a room together, and the president says, hey, Mr. Sales Leader, what would be the biggest thing you'd like to see today? And he goes, I want $1 million order. And, everybody's cheering. And I said, time out. And I turned to manufacturing and inventory. And I said, if we had $1 million order today, could we fulfill it? And they said, no, we can't. We don't have the inventory. We can't get the inventory. And we'd probably be 6 months before we could deliver, which in turn would hurt the reputation of the company. So again, beyond that, what is marketing? It's really that holistic side. I really, some people say I'm more like a chief strategy officer than a marketing officer, because again, I look at that broader picture. So hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, it did. And it's striking to me because in most of your answer, you almost sound more like you're playing the job as a COO or a process engineer, the way you're thinking about it. But you said the original problem in some cases is, hey, we want to do a rebrand. How do you position clients typically to be open to you stepping out? Because to me, when somebody says, hey, I'm hiring some outside help to help me rebrand, it usually doesn't come with somebody saying, hey, your operations are failing in this area, or this happens. So I guess I'm interested in that story. Do you position yourself in a particular way so people are open to you having that more holistic view? Or in a sense, like you said, chief strategy officer makes sense to me, but it's an interesting tie-in starting with marketing problems. So I'd be interested in your take on that.
Sure. So, it's that, I call it a land and expand strategy. It's what's going to get you in the door. And typically the call I get is because of marketing. But once I start to talk to them, I start to expand about in my presentations of what I mean by marketing. And so I have an assessment tool that I created. And part of that is really about alignment. It's about discovering where the issues are, discovering where the gaps are. But a lot of it's about alignment, because I can look at the aggregate based on the answers, but I can also look at the individuals. And it's always really interesting when the CEO of the company says one thing, and then the head of sales said something different, and the head of operations say something different. So right off the bat, I know I've got a problem because they've got a problem. And so I look for those gaps and then work to how do I bring them together? And some of those things are easy to fix. Some of them are very difficult to fix. And my belief is if I can't get them in alignment prior to doing a lot of the work that we do, no matter what, at the end, they're still going to have problems and they're all going to disagree, right? So I have to work on that process of getting them to understand who they think they are, what they think their clients think they are, and then bringing some realities to that, and then helping to, kind of push things around and knead the dough, if you will, to really get them to say, yes, this is who we are. This is who we want to be. It doesn't align necessarily with what the market thinks we are. So now we're going to fix those things. And so that's my kind of initial process that I use to really sort things out. I mean, I'm sitting with a client. We went through this process, and one of the questions was about onboarding. Do you have a strong onboarding program? And the CEO gave it a 5, and the guy in charge of it gave it a 1. And the CEO's in the meeting, and I'm showing him the details, and he turns to this guy and he says, you think it's a 1? He goes, you're responsible for it. He goes, yeah, I do. And do you think it's a 5? And my point to them was, you guys have been working together for 26 years. Yeah. And this is just coming to the surface. That's the bigger problem to me. Not that your onboarding program, has some difficulty. Is the fact that you're just discovering this kind of stuff. So that's part of that process to get people to understand. At a prospect a couple of years ago, I did my assessment, and he was a new son of the father that passed away. Now he became the CEO, and the assessment said that your people don't really believe in what you're doing and following you. And he got mad at me, and I was like, I didn't do this. It's not my work. I'm just bringing this to the surface. And so people don't want to know sometimes what the realities are. It's what that perception is. And so I give, the employees, if you will, or the stakeholders, a safe place to talk and to get those realities as a first step.
Yeah. I find this so insightful and fascinating because in some ways, especially from the podcast and from my own work in the field, you could say it doesn't matter what services you offer. This step has to be done first, regardless. It could be a branding problem. It could be a marketing problem. It could be any type of problem. If you can't get the executives talking, if you can't get operational alignment, value alignment, I feel like a lot of times you would not be able to get anything done, right? So in a way, my question to you is, did you always approach your consulting or your practice this way? Or is this something that you discovered along the way? Or kind of what made you land in this area where it's almost facilitating and coaching has to happen first in your discovery before you can do any meaningful work? So I'm just wondering what that looked like in your journey, how you came to that.
Yeah, so my journey is, to give you the short version, in the advertising agency business. I was always either the account guy in my early years, and then I moved into planning and strategic planning and research. So that was kind of always my focus. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. And a friend of mine who was a creative director once told me to don't ever try to be a creative guy because you suck. So so I've always kind of been there, whether it was in the agency world or on the client side. It was in the marketing department and things like that. So that's kind of always where I gravitated. But you learn over the years of what works and what doesn't. And more importantly, I got to see where, in my younger days, if you will, people would say, this is our process and this is what we're doing. And I would, go, well, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Why wouldn't you want to go ask? And I was very fortunate in my first client side experience, actually working in the oil and gas industry, and they wanted to build a new product. And so as the young marketing guy, I got to be the one that kind of was the champion. So we would we looked at competitors. They said, okay, here's our list of questions, if you will. And I traveled around the US and talked to all potential prospects. And, what if you had a product like this? And then I went back, and then they sent me out again with drawings. Then again, they sent me out with prototypes. So I got to see this process really early on about getting a customer's perspective and not just, the engineers or the people in the back room, what they think. I always say to clients, I appreciate everything you have to say, but I don't really care. Why? Because you're not buying your own products. You're not going to buy, in this particular case, $1 million wafer stepper, right? It is not. I need to know about the people who are going to buy it. What are their concerns? What are their issues? What are your concerns about your brand? And this is a true story. I worked on, which is now one of the most successful wafer stepper companies in the world. But they had already had 2 entries into the United States and failed. And I'm not saying it was all because of me or my team, but we took a different approach and tried to understand why they failed. But more importantly, going to the 3rd round, we had to know what the perception was in the marketplace. We had to turn that perception. We had to change the way that prospects thought about this brand, right? You had to manage their reputation as well. So it wasn't just about marketing per se. It was about, we had to change the image, change the perception, give them more of a stronger reason. Before, it was all about product. This time it was about value and benefits. And so that also began to shape about how I think of communications from a customer-centric standpoint, not a company-centric. That's great. Hey, I've been like the client I was telling you about earlier with the onboarding. Yeah, I've been in business for 75 years. And my point to them was, congratulations. What are you going to do for me tomorrow? That's just a reason to believe that you've done something right. And you're not the originators, by the way. But what are you going to do for me tomorrow? And I think companies lose sight of that they start to really internalize or fall in love with their own product and process. And sometimes they just can't get out of their own way, and which is great for myself and probably people like yourself, right? That's why we're in there as consultants, because they can't get past that. And we try to bring that stuff to light and help guide them. And I think there's something else you said is, how do I really get that confidence? And part of my thing is, I have to have a seat at the table. I'm not your wrist. I'm not an extension of your, if you're going to tell me what to do, I don't want to be involved. I want to participate. I have to shape it. And you might not like my ideas, but at least I have the table because I'm giving consultation, if you will. And so that's kind of a prerequisite for me from a fractional standpoint. I have to just sit there with the rest of the team and be able to contribute versus, the guy down the hallway, the marketing director that's executing stuff. That's not me.
And I have a few questions about some of what you said there, but working backwards, do you feel that the fractional staff versus saying you're strictly a consultant helps you get that seat at the table? Like, is that in itself a conscious branding?
Well, the fractional part of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because again, it's, are there me's out there? Yeah, absolutely. Are there full-time CMOs? Absolutely. But depending on the organization, can they afford a full-time CMO? And not only can they afford them, can they really keep them busy? I just finished an engagement with a manufacturing company actually out of Boston for 3.5 years. And eventually it was like, okay, we're ready to hire somebody. But prior to that, I got in. The company was the product line. The company was older, but the new line was only 7 months old when I got involved, and I got to watch it and help set the tone and do all the assessments of the market and who we were going to target and why we were targeting them and what industries. And I got to work with them from basically no revenue. I think when I left, it was they were at 7 million. So, but they grew into the point where they could hire somebody that was more senior versus bringing me on at the time. That wouldn't have made any sense.
Got it. That makes sense. And I have a few more intelligent questions, but before I ask those, I have a sillier question, which is, what is a wafer stepper? Was I hearing that right?
Yeah. So it's the machines that make semiconductors.
Oh, okay. I just never heard that term, so I didn't know if that was something I should have.
Well, yeah, because you're dealing with the wafers, right?
Okay.
The disc, and they're etching all the semiconductors in
Oh,
those.
I
So,
see. Okay.
yeah, so it was really cool. Actually, we had to, get all dressed up in the clean room stuff and go in. And of course, we were like, "Hey, can I take this suit home with me? I got to change my oil this weekend." And
Yeah.
they go, "Yeah, we'll give you some."
That's always fun working in manufacturing or sort of the more industrial clients, because you get to see all those neat things. Yeah, that's great. Well, and part of the story there, which I really appreciated, was really talking about the voice of the customer. That's what we call it in Six Sigma, at least, where it doesn't even matter what you're doing, connecting the process back to the customer today is so critical. And I like also you talked about this idea of, you've got companies that they know their way around, right? They've been around 25, 50, 75 years, but especially nowadays, at least I feel like, and I'd love to hear your opinion, the customers change every day. If you're not staying present with the market is evolving so quickly. I feel like if you're not doing voice of the customer on a pretty regular basis, it's going to be hard to keep up. But I'd love to hear kind of what you're seeing on that.
Yeah, so part of my process is the voice of the customer in lots of different ways to get there. But it still amazes me that I can't actually say in the a little over 10 years, 6 months that I've been doing this company, that I've ran into a whole lot of clients that said, yes, we do it on a regular basis. Most of them have never done it. And it's mind boggling to me that, but if they're successful and they're growing and things have worked out, and it's like, well, why do I need to do all that stuff? That's been great. But I'm working with a company right now. When I started doing my process with them literally a year ago, and we moved into 2025, I said, here's some things I'm seeing. Here's what I think you should do to protect yourself in this particular vertical. And I was like, no, we got that one wired. You're going to work on this other stuff. Here we are 8 months later, and that industry is hurting because it's tied into housing starts and things like that. So, but I gave them a strategy on how to try to counteract some of that. But they, for 20 years, they've been doing this. So they just didn't think that was necessary. So I see a lot of that. Back to this company with the onboarding. There was a large HVAC company. And so I said, look, I want to talk to your customers. And they're saying, well, they love us. You don't really need to talk to them. We've been working with them forever. So I finally convinced them that why I needed to talk to them. And kind of, while several things came out, there was one important thing. And first of all, yes, they did love them. However, the majority of people, because they dealt with mechanical engineers in these construction companies, that most of them were going to retire in 5 years. They were all in their 60s. The new generation didn't really know them, didn't even particularly like them, because they were looking for environmentally friendly products, which my client did not have. They were looking for these new packaging deals, which my client did not have. And so my point to them when we presented this was, if you don't change, you're going to be out of business in 5 or 6 years. When your customers leave, you're not going to get any business, or you're going to get little. And so they literally changed. They went out and found some environmentally friendly products. We put a program together for them to start outreaching to that kind of 30 to 40-year-old engineer, so they could start to educate them. But they had no plans to do any of that, because why? They've been successful for decades.
Yeah. Well, and in your take, and sounds like you're really big on reaching out to the customers. Do you have a particular process you use, or is it just sort of call them, get in front of them? However, the more intimate, the better. Because I know a lot of people now are doing the surveys and things, and I'm not a marketing expert, so I don't actually know a lot in this realm. But what is appropriate, in your opinion, of actually reaching out and getting a true assessment of customers? How far does one have to go, or how do you recommend going about it typically?
Well, there's a couple different ways, and some are interviews. It kind of depends on what the assignment is.
Yeah.
Right. So I just finished one, for example, enterprise software company that's creating. I'm not going to call it a SaaS product, but creating a product, kind of a slimmed down version, if you will, for the middle market. But they're building it, and the question was, what are the feature set? I know what the engineers want, but what's the feature set? And so our approach was a quantitative study, and we identified. We went out, talked to 465 leaders within those organizations that had something to do with the supply chain, inventory management stuff. And so we figured out a way to get to those folks. We figured out a way to make sure we screened them, that we had the right people in the survey. And then we, asked them a lot of upfront questions about what they currently use and how they use it, what their issues are, how do they vet companies like this to bring on board. Then we exposed them for the new product. Then we served them up a battery of questions to help determine what the right feature set is, and also what potential pricing ranges might be. But that was a quantitative study, and I have a data scientist that works with me, and then he got the data and he worked out his magic, so we could look at from a definitive predicted standpoint what those 5 or 6 features were. We were after the top 5, but it was actually the top 6 that pretty much satisfied 7 different verticals that they were looking at. But what that allowed them to do is get it to market quicker, not spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars in development, adding features that nobody really cared about.
Yeah.
And so we were able to streamline stuff like that. And that took probably almost 2 months to do all that work.
Yeah.
But that's different than just trying to dig in to understand what do you think about my company, right? I know what I think I am. What do you think I am, right? That's a different process.
Well, and you had mentioned, so there's a lot of different ways to do it, but you had kind of mentioned too that some clients are just resistant to doing this exercise in any variety. Do you have any insight or ideas from your being in the field? Like, why do people not want to talk to their own customers on a regular basis? Or like, what's the resistance there? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think in most cases they just don't think they need to.
Yeah.
Right. We've got revenue, things have been going well, or we have another issue than from our current customers. And it's always about the current customers. Well, part of that is, yes, you have current customers. Well, how do we expand? How do we, grow your base? Is it new markets? I worked with a med tech company last year, and 41 years old. And one of their questions to me is, how big is our market? We don't know. Well, I scratched my head. First of all, didn't say it out loud, right? Thought it. But how can you be in business for 41 years and not know how big your market is? They thought they saturated it. And so part of my assignment was looking at adjacent markets, same services, adjacent markets. But after we did all the work, it was like, you guys haven't even scratched the surface
Yeah.
And if you just look at back to some of these processes, this is the people that waited to the end to hand the documents to the lawyers. You have huge opportunities, but you've got all these other issues that are going on. And my favorite, this, and again, I'm not mentioning names, but it was like, so who handles current clients? I go, well, that's operations. Really? Operations? Okay. Call the operations guy. No, we don't do that. That's customer service. Call customer service. No, that's sales. And it was like, who handles current customers? Who's nurturing these guys? Why? Because I looked at your books and you're decreasing in sales in some of these clients that you have.
Yeah.
And yet you're telling me you want to get this X number of revenue. In the meantime, you might hit your goal in new sales, but you're losing current clients. Who's paying attention to this stuff? And it's just mind-boggling to me when you kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. All this stuff's going on. And it's like, okay, now I'm an outside guy looking in, and I can see it, that I guess maybe you can't.
It's mind-boggling. Maybe what you're trying to articulate is that it really is like an episode of The Office everywhere. In some ways, you get in there and you think it's a joke, but then a lot of business is that way. And especially, you just don't see what you don't see after 10 years working in the same place with the same folks. I think it's a pretty common thing to fall into.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Well, I know we've been circling some of your unique perspective and the strategies you use and the way you think about what you do. So I would love to hear just a little bit more about Craft and why Craft the name, like what's the history there, but also what's unique about how you conduct business at Craft versus, let's say, other fractional CMOs? Because I feel like this is kind of a hot space right now, especially with the small, medium businesses. So I'd love to just know a little bit more about your positioning with your current endeavor.
Sure. Well, so the idea of Craft is building. If my background was in here, we're called Craft, and my tag is building better brands. And so the idea of kind of the messaging, building, creating foundations. So we kind of tied in craftsmanship, even though I don't technically use that word, but that's the idea. And then somebody said to me one day, well, you guys are like architects. And I went, yeah, that's really good. So that added to the nomenclature, except unfortunately I can't use marketing architects because it's trademarked by somebody else. But unfortunately found out the wrong way. But it's that whole idea of building and crafting and taking the time. And basically, you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. How can you build your marketing business, or frankly your business, without a blueprint, right? And so that's kind of how we tied all that together. But interesting, Craft. So I'll go back a bit. So when I sold my advertising agency to a large independent agency, and we were there for about 8 years, and then they tried to move us. I didn't want to move, and so I got a small team, and I actually went out to people I competed against, and we put together this dream team, and we called it Craft. But it was like in 2008, 9-ish, right? Who knew the recession was going to come along? So it never really got any traction. So when I went back client side, I just, I still had the name, and I just didn't do anything with it. So when I started this company, originally, actually, it was called something different. It was called Strategic Market Intelligence, trying to play off more of the research side, but that side didn't play well with the fractional work and consulting. So we were thinking about names, and my partner said, well, hey, we've got Craft. Let's resurrect it. That's frankly how it got there.
That's cool. Yeah, I always love to hear people's brand stories and their company names, because it ranges. It's so interesting, from it was the only domain left to, there was this history or this big backstory. So I guess my last thing is, why Craft? What's the Craft difference? Let's put it that way. What do you think really differentiates you in your space?
Well, I jokingly say it's me, but I
That's
think
fair
it's
for consulting.
Yeah, but I think I think what differentiates me is everything we talked about. It's that foundation of work is with research, and while I'll have people say, "Oh, I do strategies, I do this, I do that," they don't. And so I belong to this networking group. And when I joined, my very first meeting, I was sitting at a table of 40 people. By the time it got to me, 7 people had already used the word marketing, branding, website, social media. Got to me, and I'm like, okay, what the hell am I going to say? So it took me a little while to figure it out. But what I did is every time I bumped into somebody that used one of those words, I went and had lunch with them because I wanted to understand what was their real offering. Mm-hmm. Were they really my competitor? Were they a potential partner? Were there some gray areas? And I got to really understand how to define myself. And again, what I found is that core of using research as foundational separates me from everybody else. Now, again, some guys they say, I do strategy, I do this, but they're more on the creative side. So we can partner. I bump into people who I know like are video people. And next thing you know, they're calling themselves fractional CMOs. I have a guy out in San Jose that I work with. And when I first met him, he said, I'm going to vet you. I'm really going to drill you because I went into a meeting, brought a fractional CMO in the middle of the meeting, new business meeting. The guy admits he's a website designer. Yeah. So I run into a lot of that. A guy I know who really is kind of like a LinkedIn guy. He's in a meeting and he's talking about how he does strategy and research, and then he realized I was sitting behind him, and then he went, oh, well, Angelo does that for me, right? He panicked. But if I wasn't in that room, he never would have said that. So that's probably the one thing that's confusing, I think, to a lot of folks is what is the real fractional and how does that work? And especially because if they're thinking tactics, it's easy to say, I'm fractional and I'm going to help you with your tactics. But those that I've worked with and the people that refer me in, I think have a real clear understanding of what I do that's different than everybody else. Now, am I completely different than the rest of the world? Probably not. But in my world that I deal with, I'm probably the biggest thing for me was when I go to some of these meetings and other people in the meeting are telling my story for me on my behalf. Then I know I've done a good job in my positioning.
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you. And especially marketing. And I'll admit, I've even had trouble in the last few years, marketing and fractional CMOs and all sorts of marketing support out there. It's very muddy. The scope, where it starts and ends, what's the service, what differentiates one from another. It's unless you're very knowledgeable, I think, in the space and what you need from a marketing perspective, it's not easy to shop, or at least that's in my experience.
Well, it is confusing. I mean, just me alone, and you probably have the same. I mean, in an average day, I get solicited, which ironically from marketing people that are going to, get me so many leads, I don't know what to do with them, and making all these promises. And of course, when I say, well, if you're going to do all this stuff for me, then I'll tell you what, let's do a nice commission structure. You do it, and we'll share. And well, no, I need to get paid for it. Well, then obviously, you don't believe in that. So I used to do that a lot with the media. They go, our magazine's the best. I said, great. So why don't we just share that? And no, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yep, a lot of that going on. Well, I'm glad that you're able to share some of your insight and what separates you from the field. And in general, I appreciate our conversation today. I really appreciate you sharing some of your client stories, some of your insights, some of how you think about data and strategy, and how you really have a lot of process. I feel like you and I actually, as process engineers, probably have a lot in common just from listening to the way you approach things. But before we end today, do you have any last minute things you want to share with the audience about how they can find you, about your company? I'll let you kind of say goodbye, however makes the most sense.
Okay. Well, thank you again. This has been a fun conversation. I love it. Somebody wants to connect or learn more about me, the easiest to go to LinkedIn. From LinkedIn, you can get to my website. On my website, I do have some free stuff. I have a mini marketing course that I did. I have a couple of ebooks, a lot of videos. And so just go ahead and download those that you want. And that's the easiest. It's go to LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And we will do that. And we'll also post some of Angelo's stuff in the show notes for you. So if you're tuning in, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Process Lab. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.